I tried to save them. I drew the line. In the dirt, in the law, in fire. And they destroyed it. They called me paranoid, unneighborly. Said my Fireline ruined the view. Then the flames came. Fast, loud, unforgiving, straight through the spot where my fire break used to be. And where were the HOA board members when it hit? Inside the clubhouse, holding a meeting about landscaping. I built a wall to stop the fire. They bulldozed it. Now their perfect neighborhood is ash. Part 1. They say once you've smelled wildfire in your sleep, it never truly leaves you. The scent clings to the back of your throat like a ghost that refuses to be exorcised. My name is Daniel Fletcher. 26 years with CAL FIRE left my back, a wreck, my knees shot, and my lungs permanently dusted with Sierra ash. I thought retirement would finally grant me silence. Instead, it gave me Crestmore Bluffs, a gated subdivision of perfect lawns and pastel roofs perched on the eastern edge of a city that still believed it was safe from the wild. My wife Ellen had circled this neighborhood in real estate brochures for years. Look, Dan, no more choppers at 3 a.m., no more ember storms she'd tease. Cancer stole her before the papers were signed, so when I found the last house on the cul-de-sac, the one that actually faced the open chaparral instead of another identical stucco wall, I bought it outright. Cash. No mortgage, no heirs, no arguments, just me, a battered red pickup and a view of hills that turned gold every August and whispered danger to anyone still willing to listen. I listened. Within a week, I could feel it, the air too dry, the native brush too tall, the ravine behind the back fences too perfect a funnel. A single ridge of wildland separated Crestmore Bluffs from a decade of drought-stressed fuel. The subdivision sat in the mouth of a chimney, wearing a smile. I walked the eastern boundary at dawn. Decorative hedges and a 6-foot cedar fence were all that stood between manicured Bermuda grass and a forest that hadn't seen prescribed fire in years. The HOA had blocked the last scheduled burn. I found the old newsletter in the welcome binder, controlled burn canceled due to resident concerns over smoke and curb appeal. Someone had underlined curb appeal in red ink. I stood there in my worn Nomex pants and felt the old instincts flare like a struck match. The slope dropped away from the houses toward the wildland at exactly the angle that turns a ground fire into a crowning monster. No defensible space, no fuel breaks. Nothing but drought-brittle coyote brush and a ravine ready to inhale embers and exhale hell. That afternoon, I opened the shed, brushed 20 years of dust off my Pulaski and McLeod, and started clearing my own yard first. I limbed the cypress trees back 15 feet, hauled dead branches to the curb, and raked the pine needles into piles taller than I was. Neighbors watched from behind triple-pane windows. One waved. Most pretended not to see the retired firefighter turning his retirement dream into a fire break. Then I stepped beyond my fence onto the narrow strip the city maps still labeled Municipal Utility Easement. HOA landscapers had colonized it with planter beds and river rock, but the soil itself belonged to no one in particular, which made it perfect. I began to dig. 4 feet wide, 2 feet deep, scraped clean to mineral earth. A simple hand line, the kind I'd cut 1,000 times under worse conditions. 70 yards in 2 days. My shoulders burned the way they used to on day 3 of a campaign fire, and the pain felt like coming home. That was the moment the silver Lexus glided up the street and everything changed. A tall man in a pressed polo stepped out first, HOA president badge, gleaming like a sheriff's star. Scott Langley, late 50s gelled hair, fighting a losing battle against recession. Behind him came Karen Thornbridge, chair of the landscaping committee, clipboard clutched like a riot shield, and eyes already narrowed in judgment. Mr. Fletcher, I presume Scott's voice carried the practiced warmth of a man who had never once lost a vote. I leaned on my rake and nodded once. Karen didn't wait for pleasantries. We've received multiple reports of unauthorized excavation in a common area visual buffer. It's a fire break, I said, wiping sweat from my brow. State law allows actually requires defensible space in the WUI. This easement qualifies. Karen's smile was thin enough to cut glass. This is Crestmore Bluffs, Mr. Fletcher. We have architectural guidelines that supersede whatever habits you brought from the forest. Scott raised a placating hand. Perhaps you missed the community standards packet. Any alteration of HOA-managed landscaping requires prior approval. I pointed at the trench. This isn't landscaping. This is survival. Karen's nostrils flared. It's an eyesore. You will fill it in immediately or face formal violation. I met her stare. Then the violation will have to stand alongside California Public Resources, Code 4291. I'm happy to let Cal Fire decide which one matters more. For the first time, Scott looked uncertain. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a wasp. We'll be in touch, she snapped, spinning on her heel. As the Lexus purred away, I turned back to the ridge glowing gold in the late light. The wind shifted, coming hot and dry off the chaparral, carrying the faint scent of pine resin and something older, something hungry. I tightened my grip on the rake. They had no idea what was already on its way. That night, I sat on the back deck with a mug of black coffee gone cold, watching the ridgeline fade from gold to bruised purple. The wind kept nudging the wind chimes next door, soft metallic warnings no one else seemed to hear. My knees throbbed in the exact rhythm they used to on long fire assignments, a private barometer telling me pressure was dropping fast. Somewhere out there, the forest was holding its breath. 2 more days passed without a letter, but Karen Thornbridge didn't waste time. She arrived alone the first morning, sun hat tilted like a battle helmet phone already recording. She planted herself on the far side of my fence and filmed me in silence, while I lengthened the break another 30 feet. The scrape of steel on dry soil echoed between us like a dare. On the second morning, she brought reinforcements, a man in a neon safety vest, who introduced himself as the HOA's landscape aesthetics inspector. He circled my trench, snapping photos muttering about non-compliant soil exposure and disrupted visual continuity. Karen hovered behind him, arms folded so tightly her knuckles went white. "You were expressly asked to pause," she said, voice sharp enough to slice the hot air. "No," I answered without looking up, driving the Pulaski into the earth. "You asked me to pause while the board reviewed. I checked the mailbox. Nothing's arrived. Work continues." The inspector glanced nervously at Karen. She ignored him and zoomed her camera on my face. "This is association-managed property." I straightened, sweat stinging my eyes. "It's a public utility easement, and I'm restoring it to code-required defensible space. If the board wants to drag Cal Fire out here, I'll give them the tour myself." Her lips pressed into a colorless line. "You're not a battalion chief anymore, Mr. Fletcher. You're a homeowner. Start acting like one." I wiped my hands on my jeans and stepped closer to the fence so she could see the dust in every crease of my skin. "Out there," I said, nodding toward the ridge rank, "doesn't matter. Experience does. And right now, experience is telling me we're one lightning strike away from losing everything you spent years polishing." She held my gaze for 3 full seconds, long enough for something uncertain to flicker behind the anger, then turned on her heel and marched away, the inspector scurrying after her like a scolded dog. That afternoon, I finished flagging the full 110-foot stretch with bright orange tape. I sprayed biodegradable paint along both edges, so even a golf cart rolling past at dusk would see the line. Then I sat at my kitchen table and wrote the board a proper letter: GS maps, fire danger ratings, photographs, time-stamped, and captioned, every citation underlined in red. I quoted Public Resources Code FIRA 4291, twice attached the State Fire Marshal's latest bulletin, and ended with a simple offer. "I will present this material at your next meeting. 10 minutes. No cost to the association. All I ask is that you look east for once, instead of at each other's lawns." I hit send to every board member's HOA email address, walked the envelope to the Clubhouse Dropbox for good measure, and waited. The reply came taped to my front door the next afternoon, an elegant cream envelope that smelled faintly of lavender. Inside, unsigned HOA letterhead informed me I was now under review for Class 2 violation, unauthorized landscaping alteration. Daily fines of $250 would begin immediately. Continued refusal to remediate would trigger lien proceedings. I read it twice, laughed once, and added it to a growing manila folder labeled Crestmore Bluffs in thick black marker. That evening, I hand-delivered a second packet to the Clubhouse mailbox. Inside were the same maps, now highlighted in neon yellow, plus fresh screenshots from the Cal Fire app, a crimson banner screaming red flag warning, extreme. I included a handwritten note on plain white paper. You may not see the threat yet, but it sees you. This isn't about my yard. This is about every child asleep behind these walls. Please, reconsider. 3 days of silence followed. Neighbors began crossing the street when they saw me coming. Gary, the retired dentist, 2 doors down, muttered troublemaker loud enough for me to hear. I smiled anyway. Most kept their curtains drawn, but not everyone. Late one afternoon, a soft knock startled me from the recliner. An older woman stood on the porch clutching a Tupperware of still warm chocolate chip cookies. Silver hair, kind eyes, trembling hands. Eileen Hargrove, she said, 4 houses down. I just wanted to thank you. Her voice cracked. My husband passed last year. I'm alone now. That line you're digging, it's the first time since he died that I've slept without worrying the hill's going to catch. I invited her in. Over coffee, she showed me the letter the HOA had sent her 12 months earlier, a formal warning not to trim the pine trees overhanging her garage because they violated uniform canopy guidelines. Vertical torches, I thought, picturing needles raining onto shingles in a crown fire. I gave her Lieutenant Rosa Gill's direct number and told her exactly what to say if they ever threatened her again. When Eileen left, the cookies were gone and the house felt a little less empty. Outside, the sky had turned that brittle, cloudless blue that only appears right before everything goes wrong. I stepped onto the deck again. The wind had shifted hard out of the east, hot and restless, pushing the scent of resin straight into Crestmore Bluffs. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then stopped, like even the animals knew to save their breath. I tightened my grip on the railing and whispered to the darkening ridge, "Come on then. Let's see who blinks first." The next time I saw Karen Thornbridge, she was walking Baron, her absurd cream-colored Labradoodle, past my driveway at a deliberate crawl. The dog wore a reflective collar that probably cost more than my first turnout coat. She slowed just enough to deliver a single sentence sweet as antifreeze. "You're going to learn that Crestmore Bluffs doesn't bend for anyone, Mr. Fletcher." I was on my knees, tying flagging tape, and didn't bother standing. Good thing I'm not asking it to bend. I'm asking it to survive. She gave me the kind of smile people reserve for the delusional and mentally ill, then tugged Baron along. The dog looked back once confused, as if he sensed the ridge was already exhaling heat. 2 mornings later, the escalation arrived in matching green polos. I was widening the break near the utility poles when 2 landscapers appeared with weed whackers and shovels. The taller one held out a work order like a warrant. I recognized Karen's looping signature at the bottom: restore easement to approved aesthetic condition. Remove unauthorized trench and reseed with approved fescue blend. I set my Pulaski down gently, the way you lower a rifle. You're not ready to fire yet. "Names," I said. They exchanged glances. The shorter one swallowed. "We just do what the order says, sir." "Then you should know that if either of you puts steel to that soil, you're personally destroying state-mandated defensible space during a declared red flag period. Public Resources Code 4291. Up to $1,000 fine each plus civil liability if this subdivision burns because of what you're about to do. I'll need your full names and contractor license numbers for the report I'm filing with the fire marshal right now." The taller one's weed whacker dipped toward the ground like it suddenly weighed 100 pounds. 10 seconds of silence. Then they both backed away, muttering apologies to the air itself, and piled into their truck. Dust plumed as they fled. Karen arrived before the dust settled. She stormed up the sidewalk in linen capris and Fury HOA bylaws, flapping in one hand like a battle flag. "You threatened my contractors," she shouted loud enough for 3 cul-de-sacs to hear. I informed them of the law. I said calm as poured concrete. "Same law I've been emailing your board for weeks. This is harassment." "No, Karen. Harassment is watching you bury a fire break under petunias while the county sits at extreme fire danger." Her face went the color of the red flag banner. "You do not get to speak to me that way." I stepped over the tape line until we were toe-to-toe across the fence pickets. Then stopped giving me reasons. She opened her mouth, closed it, then spun and left without another word. The bylaws fluttered to the ground behind her like a white flag she refused to wave. That afternoon, a teenager on a lime green bicycle slid a manila envelope under my door and pedaled away like he was escaping a crime scene. Inside, a cease and desist on expensive letterhead from Perch and Lyman LLP, the HOA's retained attorneys. 8 bullet points of accusations, an invoice for $500 in retroactive fines, and a promise of further legal remedies if I didn't restore the easement to its original landscaped condition within 7 days. I laughed so hard the neighbors probably thought I'd finally cracked. Then I called Lieutenant Rosa Gill. Rosa and I went back 15 years. I'd trained her on her first Type 1 assignment. She still owed me for saving her crew from a flank that tried to eat them alive near Yosemite. She listened without interrupting while I read her the cease and desist verbatim. When I finished, there was only the sound of her breathing. Finally, they're threatening you for building a legal fire break during Red Flag Week. Signed by the Landscaping Committee Chair herself. A low whistle. Daniel, this is beyond stupid. This is reckless endangerment wearing a blazer. Send me everything. I'm looping in the County Council and the State Fire Marshal's legal unit tonight. Already in your inbox, I said. She paused. You okay? I looked out the window at the ridge now glowing blood orange in the sunset. No, I told her, but I will be when this is over. That night, I printed 75 full-color flyers on bright yellow paper. Is your HOA putting curb appeal over human lives? Below the headline satellite images, fire danger maps, copies of the cease and desist, with the worst paragraphs highlighted and a single question in bold. When the next fire crests that ridge, will perfect hedges, save your family. At 4:30 the next morning, I walked every street in Crestmore Bluffs, sliding one under every doormat, every windshield wiper. The air was already 78 degrees, and the sky the color of a fresh bruise. By 9 o'clock, my phone started ringing. Some callers yelled. Most just wanted to know if it was true. One mother with a sleeping baby on her shoulder stood on my porch and whispered we had ashfall last summer. They told us it was seasonal pollen. Thank you for telling us the truth. I handed her Rosa's card. Call this number if they ever threaten you again. She hugged me with one arm, baby still asleep against her chest, and left before I could feel the tears in my own eyes. Friday was the next scheduled HOA meeting. I showered, put on the only clean button-down I owned, and filled a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. At 6:55 p.m., I carried a folding chair into the clubhouse myself. The citrus air freshener hit me like a slap. 20 residents scattered across 100 empty seats. Karen sat at the head table in a navy blazer sharp enough to draw blood. Scott Langley looked like he hadn't slept since the Lexus first rolled up my street. Karen opened with a smile that never reached her eyes. Item 1, she announced, continued easement violations along the eastern perimeter. She never got to item 2. I was already on my feet. The clubhouse smelled of lemon polish and barely contained panic. I walked straight to the center aisle, binder under one arm, folding chair in the other. Every head turned. A phone camera lifted. I didn't wait for permission. Daniel Fletcher, I said, voice carrying the way it used to when I took incident command. Retired Cal Fire Battalion Chief. 26 years on the line. I'm the violation you're about to discuss. Karen's knuckles whitened on her gavel. This is not an open forum. Then make it one, I cut in dropping the binder on the table with a thud that rattled water glasses. Because the open forum is coming whether you schedule it or not. It's coming with sirens. I opened the binder and fanned pages like a deck of cards. Satellite photos, red flag maps, the cease and desist, the work order to destroy the firebreak. Rosa Gill's official letterhead already in the stack. Scott tried for calm. Daniel, we have procedures. Procedures, I repeated. Here's a procedure you skipped, Public Resources Code 4291. Here's another, California Health and Safety Code 13009, personal liability for anyone who interferes with lawful fire prevention. And here's the one you really don't want to read, Penal Code 372. Criminal obstruction of emergency measures. All of them now in the hands of the county fire marshal and the state attorney general's office. The room went colder than the air conditioning could account for. I turned to the 20 residents scattered in the seats. 17 of you have children under 10. 32 of you have at least one parent living with you. All of you live 300 vertical feet below a ridge loaded with a decade of dead fuel. And the people at this table just hired landscapers to erase the only thing standing between your houses and a wind-driven crown fire. A woman in the third row gasped. Her husband's arm went around her shoulders. Karen found her voice. You are fear-mongering and disrupting an official meeting. No, Karen, I'm informing. There's a difference. I held up the latest weather printout. Right now, the relative humidity is 19%. Winds gusting to 35 out of the east. Lightning forecast for tonight and tomorrow. That's not fear. That's the National Weather Service. Scott cleared his throat. We'll table this until legal counsel. Legal counsel already weighed in, I said, sliding Rosa's letter across the table. It stopped an inch from Karen's blazer button. Read the last paragraph out loud, Scott. The one that says the city is opening an immediate inquiry into obstruction of mandated defensible space. Scott's hand hovered, then retreated. I faced the room again. I'm not asking for your permission anymore. I'm telling you what's already in motion. The fire break stays. The fines are suspended as of an hour ago, County Council's order. And if a single shovel touches that line again, the person holding it will be on camera, on record, and on the hook when the insurance companies come looking for someone to blame. Silence thick enough to choke on. Then a single chair scraped. Eileen Hargrove stood small but steady. I'm 78 years old, she said, voice trembling only a little. I've lived through earthquakes, mudslides, and one husband with cancer. I will not burn alive because somebody wanted matching mulch. Another chair, then another. Within 30 seconds, half the room was on its feet. Karen stared like she'd been slapped with her own clipboard. Scott finally spoke barely above a whisper. Meeting adjourned. I left the binder on the table. They would need it more than I did. Outside, the air had teeth. The wind had picked up hard, shoving palm fronds sideways, rattling the clubhouse windows like it wanted in. Overhead, the first dry lightning flickered silent blue-white veins across a black sky. I stood in the parking lot and watched heat lightning stitch the ridge. My phone buzzed. Rosa. Inquiry just went public. Local news is already calling. You still have that old scanner. Always. Turn it on, Daniel. Winds are shifting. If it jumps the highway tonight, you'll know before anyone else. I looked east. The ridge line glowed faintly under the strobes of lightning as if the forest itself was answering back. I got in the truck, left the clubhouse lights burning behind me, and drove home with every window down so I could smell what was coming. Because I already knew. The silence before a wildfire isn't empty. It's listening. I didn't sleep. The scanner on the kitchen counter crackled all night, with distant chatter. Dry lightning strikes in the next county spot fires flaring along the interstate cruise, chasing ghosts in 40-mile-an-hour gusts. Every flash outside my window lit the ridge like a negative photograph, black trees, white sky, and the unmistakable silhouette of fuel waiting for permission. At 0347, the first real call went out. Strike team requested Crestmore Ridge. Multiple starts, wind-driven crowning in heavy chaparral. Immediate threat to structures. I was already dressed. I threw the go bag into the truck, old habit never died, and drove the eastern loop with headlights off so I could see the glow. It was still miles away, a dull orange heartbeat on the far side of the ridge, but the wind was shoving it downhill at a speed that turned my stomach. By the time I reached the overlook above the ravine, the heartbeat had become a roar. Flames marched the crest in a solid line, throwing embers the size of baseballs a quarter-mile ahead of the main front. The inversion layer had shattered. The air tasted of scorched pine and hot metal. And then I saw the gap. 25 feet of freshly turned earth right in the center of my firebreak, filled with dark mulch and brand new ornamental grass still in nursery pots. River rocks outlined it like a garden border. Someone had worked fast, probably the same crew that fled days earlier, only this time they'd come back under cover of darkness with a bobcat and a signed work order. My blood went colder than the wind. I grabbed the radio I wasn't supposed to have anymore and keyed the old Cal Fire tactical frequency. Crestmore Bluffs East Perimeter. To any incident command, this is retired Battalion Chief Fletcher. Your primary containment line has been deliberately removed and replaced with Class A fuel. Repeat, the handline is gone. You're looking at an uninterrupted run straight into the subdivision. A pause, then a voice. I recognized Captain Mendez, someone I'd mentored 20 years ago. Copy that, Chief. Jesus Christ. We're still 10 miles out, and the wind's clocked at 38, sustained. Can you mark the breach? Already rolling. I floored it down the service road headlights, carving tunnels through swirling smoke. Embers pinged off the windshield like hail. By the time I skidded to a stop at the clubhouse, the sky had turned the color of a forge, and the lights inside were still on. 5 silhouettes moved behind the big plate glass windows, Karen Thornbridge clutching a stack of folders, Scott Langley pacing 3 other board members frozen in a loose circle. They were having a meeting, An actual meeting while the world caught fire behind them. I left the truck running, hazards flashing, and hit the doors at a dead sprint. The automated alarm finally woke up as I burst in the recorded voice, calm and idiotic warning. Fire proximity detected. Evacuate immediately. Karen spun around, eyes wide. You can't. Shut it and move, I roared. The ridge is crowning and your precious mulch just built it a highway. You've got 4 minutes before this building is inside the fire. Scott went the color of ash. We were finalizing evacuation protocols. Your protocol is run. I grabbed the nearest arm, some treasurer in a blazer, and shoved him toward the exit. The others followed in a panicked knot, clutching laptops and purses like talismans. Karen stood rooted, staring past me through the window. The flame front crested the ridge behind us, a solid wall 30 feet high, roaring like a freight train made of light. She made a small animal sound. I seized her elbow, hard enough to bruise, and dragged her outside. Heat slapped us the second the doors opened. Embers swirled in spirals, igniting juniper hedges with soft pops. The propane tank beside the maintenance shed hissed like it was already planning its explosion. Cars now, I barked. They scattered. Engines coughed to life. I jumped behind the wheel of my truck and led the convoy down the only road, still clear headlights cutting through a blizzard of sparks. In the rearview mirror, the clubhouse windows glowed cherry red, then burst outward in a shower of glass. A heartbeat later, the roof lifted off in one bright orange piece, and the entire structure folded into itself with a sound I felt in my teeth. Karen's scream from the car behind me was barely human. We hit the community pool parking lot, the pre-planned rally point, just as the first engine companies screamed past toward the fire. Families were already gathering under floodlights, faces lit orange from the east. Children cried. Someone's golden retriever howled at the sky. I killed the engine and stepped out into a wind that felt like opening an oven door. Scott stumbled from his Lexus tie askew, staring back at the inferno that used to be his kingdom. They really did it, he whispered. They really erased the line. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say that the fire wasn't already screaming for both of us. Overhead, the first water drop from a helicopter painted the smoke blood red. 17 homes were already gone. And the night had only just begun. The community pool parking lot became a refugee camp under a sky the color of molten copper. Fire engines lined the curb like red insects, strobes flashing across faces I'd never seen cry before. Someone had dragged out folding tables. Red Cross volunteers handed out bottles of water that turned warm the instant they left the cooler. The air was so thick with smoke that every breath tasted of barbecue gone wrong. I stood at the edge of the asphalt soot, already caked into the creases of my neck, watching the eastern half of Crestmore Bluffs disappear behind a curtain of orange. The wind had settled into a steady, malevolent push from the ridge, driving the fire in long, deliberate fingers that reached for roofs the way a thief tests windows. Scott Langley found me near the pool gate. His polo was torn at the collar. His HOA badge hung crooked like a broken medal. Daniel, he said, voice raw. We didn't think. You didn't think at all, I answered without looking at him. That's the problem. He flinched as another explosion lit the horizon, somebody's pool pump or a propane barbecue deciding to join the party. A collective scream rose from the crowd. Karen sat on the curb 20 feet away, knees drawn to her chest, staring at nothing. Her perfect sun visor lay crushed under a paramedic's boot. The woman who once measured mulch depth with a ruler now looked small enough to blow away. A sheriff's deputy pushed through the crowd with a bullhorn. Zones A4 and A5 mandatory evacuation. Move west on Canyon Crest Drive. Do not return to your homes. Panic rippled outward. Engines revved. A minivan full of kids peeled away with a stuffed giraffe hanging out the window. I keyed my old radio again. Fletcher for icy Crestmore Bluffs. I've got eyes on the east flank. It's flanking north through the ravine. You've got maybe 8 minutes before it jumps the greenbelt and hits the clubhouse row. Captain Mendez came back instantly. Copy, Chief. We're committing everything we've got, but the wind's playing games. We need a miracle or a backfire. You've got neither, I said. Just a bunch of wood shingle roofs and a garden where a fire break used to be. A long silence, then understood. We'll do what we can. Rosa Gill arrived 20 minutes later in full turnout gear helmet tucked under one arm. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in the last hour. I saw the breach from the air, she said without greeting. They used a skid steer. tire tracks still warm when the helicopter flew over. We've got photos, work orders, signatures. Karen Thornbridge authorized it yesterday at 1642. I closed my eyes for the length of one heartbeat. Of course she did. Rosa put a hand on my shoulder. You saved 5 lives tonight, Daniel. Maybe more. Don't let the rest of this eat you alive. Too late, I thought. The fire kept talking. Every few minutes, another house sighed and collapsed, the sound traveling across the valley like distant thunder. Someone's lifetime of Christmas ornaments, wedding albums, the crib their grandfather built gone in a breath. I walked the perimeter of the parking lot, helping where I could, carrying an elderly man to a waiting ambulance, calming a teenager who couldn't find his dog, handing out wet bandanas to mothers holding infants against their chests. Simple things. Firefighter things. The only language I still spoke fluently. At 02:14, the wind finally betrayed the fire. A sudden downdraft slammed the flank into the rock outcrop west of Eileen's street. Flames hit bare granite and stalled confused, giving the dozers time to cut a desperate line. Helicopters worked the head all night, dropping water in glowing silver ropes that turned to steam before they touched ground. By the time the sun bled through the smoke at dawn, the beast was surrounded. Exhausted, angry, but surrounded. 17 homes gone. 38 damaged. The clubhouse a smoking crater. 0 fatalities. I sat on the tailgate of my truck boots, dangling drinking water that tasted of plastic and ash. My house miraculously still stood on the extreme northern edge, protected by the sliver of firebreak I'd managed to finish before they erased the rest. Scott approached again this time, with a paper cup of coffee he clearly didn't expect me to take. I resigned, he said quietly, effective 30 seconds ago. The rest of the board is drafting theirs. I didn't answer. He stared at the blackened hillside. We kept saying it couldn't happen here. Like repeating it made it true. Fire doesn't negotiate with denial, I said. He nodded, eyes red. When the investigators ask, tell them whatever you need to. We earned it. He walked away before I could decide whether I hated him or pitied him. Karen never moved from the curb. A paramedic had draped a blanket over her shoulders sometime before sunrise. She clutched the CAL FIRE defensible space pamphlet I'd handed her weeks ago, the one she'd once used as a coaster. The edges were singed now, as if the fire itself had tried to read it and given up. I watched her for a long time. Then I walked over and crouched so we were eye level. She looked up. Mascara tracks carved canyons down her cheeks. I was wrong, she whispered. The words sounded foreign in her mouth, like a language she'd never practiced. Yeah, I said, you were. She started to sob quiet, broken sounds that belonged to someone else entirely. I stayed there until the tears stopped, because some debts can only be paid in silence. Then I stood, brushed ash from my knees, and went to find Eileen. The war wasn't over, but the first battle had just ended. Dawn over Crestmore Bluffs looked like the surface of Mars. A dull red sun bled through a ceiling of smoke so thick it swallowed the hills whole. Charred roof beams jutted from collapsed houses like the ribs of dead animals. The air carried the stink of melted siding, scorched cedar, and something sweeter, burned photographs maybe, or the ghosts of someone's childhood. Every breath coated your tongue with grit. 17 homes erased, 38 more scarred. The clubhouse nothing but a black hole ringed with twisted metal and the warped remains of the brass dedication plaque that once read, "Built for Community Pride, 2009. I hadn't slept, no one had. I walked the eastern perimeter at first light with Rosa Gill and 2 grim-faced investigators from the State Fire Marshal's office. We moved along what used to be my fire break. The breach was obscene, a 25-foot wide corridor of lush green grass and fresh mulch, now reduced to a glowing scar of ash. The ornamental river rocks had exploded from the heat. Shards glittered in the soot like broken teeth. Rosa pointed to the faint bobcat tracks still visible under the char. Contractor rolled in at 02:14 yesterday. Finished by 03:30. Paid rush fee. Signature K. Thornbridge. One of the investigators took close-ups with a ruler for scale. That's criminal negligence at minimum, he muttered. Possibly depraved indifference. We're pulling the HOA's insurance policy today. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say that the landscape wasn't already screaming. We found the work order crumpled in the wreckage of the maintenance shed, emergency aesthetic restoration, eastern visual buffer. Priority 1. Do not delay. Karen's looping cursive at the bottom dated the day before the fire. Rosa folded it into an evidence bag without comment. By noon, the elementary school gymnasium had become a city unto itself. Rows of cots, folding tables stacked with donuts and bottled water. A corner where kids drew pictures of houses with giant red X's through them. The local news trucks circled like vultures. Reporters kept trying to corner me. I kept walking. Eileen found me near the water station. She looked 10 years older and 20 years braver. "They saved my block," she said, voice hoarse. The fire stopped 2 houses down. "Your line held the northern edge just long enough." I managed half a smile. Good dirt and dumb luck. "No," she said firmly. "Good man." She pressed something into my hand, a small singed photograph. Her wedding day, 1968. The edges were curled, but the faces were still smiling. "I want you to have this," she said. "Proof that something beautiful can come out of the ashes." I started to refuse, but she closed my fingers over it and walked away before I could. At 14 HOAs, the city held its first post-fire press conference on the school lawn. The mayor looked like he'd been chewing glass. Flanking him were Rosa the fire marshal and the city attorney. Questions came fast and sharp. Why wasn't the subdivision prepped for interface fire? Why was a legal fire break removed 48 hours before ignition? Who authorized landscaping during a red flag warning? The mayor didn't flinch. "We are opening a full criminal and civil investigation into the Crestmore Bluffs HOA's actions. Interference with mandated defensible space is not protected by aesthetic preference. Lives were endangered. Property was lost. Accountability will be swift." Cameras swung toward the small knot of former board members standing at the back. Scott Langley looked hollowed out. Karen wasn't there. Rumors said she'd been taken to the hospital for smoke inhalation and emotional distress. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Fletcher, will you be filing suit?" I stepped forward without thinking. "No," I said, into the cluster of microphones. This was never about money. It was about stopping a disaster everyone saw coming, except the people paid to prevent it. Another reporter, "What do you want now?" I looked straight into the lens. I want every HOA, in every fire-prone zip code, stripped of the power to overrule state fire code. I want mandatory, defensible space enforcement written into municipal law. And I want the next Karen Thornbridge to think twice before she chooses petunias over people. The applause started somewhere in the back and rolled forward like a wave. That evening, the City Council issued an emergency declaration seizing oversight of all Crestmore Bluffs common area maintenance until further notice. The HOA board was formally dissolved pending investigation. Bank accounts frozen. Insurance carrier already lawyering up. I drove home through streets lined with blackened palms and melted mailboxes. My house stood quiet windows filmed with ash but intact. The surviving sliver of firebreak, the part they never got around to erasing, had funneled the flames just far enough north for engines to anchor and hold. I sat on the tailgate again, boots in the dust, and watched the sun finally burn through the smoke in a violent, bloody streak. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I was wrong. I'm sorry. There is no excuse, Kay. I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it without replying. Some apologies are too heavy to carry for the person who needs to hear them. I slipped Eileen's photograph into my shirt pocket, right over my heart, and went inside to clean the soot off a life that had almost been taken by vanity. Outside the ridge still smoked, but the wind had finally turned. For the first time in months, it was blowing the danger away from us instead of straight into our homes. 1 month later, the national news trucks were gone chasing the next flood, the next hurricane, the next tragedy that made better television than slow-burning grief. Crestmore Bluffs stayed quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a funeral when everyone has run out of things to say. The smell lingered longest. On windless mornings, the air still carried melted plastic and wet charcoal. Kids rode bikes past empty concrete slabs where houses used to be, slowing down the way people slow past cemeteries. Insurance adjusters became the most common visitors. Their white pickup trucks looked like ghosts against the blackened hills. I rebuilt the fire break myself wider this time, 40 feet of scraped earth reinforced with steel pins and woven geotextile. The city paid for it. No one argued. They even sent a crew to help young firefighters who called me chief and listened when I told them where to cut the next line. We turned the old breach into a permanent community asset gravel access road on one side, Interpretive signs on the other, explaining fuel reduction in simple language even a landscaper could understand. Karen Thornbridge sold her lot for pennies on the dollar and left the state. Word was she moved to Oregon somewhere with rain measured in feet instead of inches. No one forwarded her mail. Scott Langley stayed. He showed up at my door one Saturday morning in jeans and a faded Cal Fire t-shirt he must have bought online. He looked smaller without the polo and the badge. "I'm volunteering with the rebuild crews," he said, holding out a thermos of coffee like a peace offering. "I don't know how to use a hammer, but I can carry sheetrock and I can listen, if you'll let me." I studied him for a long moment, then took the coffee. "Start at Eileen's place. She needs her fence replaced before the rains come." He nodded and didn't say thank you. Some debts are too big for words. The city council hearing was held in the high school auditorium because the elementary gym was still a shelter. Every seat was taken. Survivors wore the same soot-stained clothes they'd escaped in washed a dozen times, but never quite clean. The room smelled of coffee and rage. They called me to the podium first. I didn't bring a binder this time. I didn't need one. I told them everything: the first trench, the cease and desist the night the clubhouse burned with 5 people still inside. I told them about the Bobcat tracks and the Rush landscaping order signed 48 hours before ignition. I told them about watching the fire follow the exact path they had landscaped for it. Then I told them what I wanted. Not money, not an apology. I wanted Ordinance 14-87, the Crestmore Wildfire Resilience Act. Mandatory 100-foot defensible space in every WUI zone HOA in the county. Pre-approved fire break plans on file with the fire department. Criminal penalties for any board member who blocks lawful mitigation. Independent oversight committees with actual firefighters on them, not just retired real estate agents. The mayor didn't let anyone else speak after me. They voted unanimously before the gavel even cooled. 2 weeks later, the governor signed the statewide version into law. They named the new section of the Public Resources Code after the 17 lost homes, the Fletcher Amendment. Reporters asked if I felt vindicated. I told them vindication doesn't rebuild photo albums, but it does keep the next neighborhood from burning for the same stupid reasons. On the first anniversary of the fire, we held a different kind of ceremony on the ridge. No politicians, no cameras, just residents, firefighters, and the people who'd lost everything. We planted 117 drought-tolerant oaks, one for every structure that burned or was damaged. Kids who'd once cried in the school gym now carried watering cans and argued over whose tree was tallest. Eileen stood beside me, leaning on a cane carved from a charred cedar branch we'd pulled from her own yard. When the last sapling was in the ground, someone started singing "You Are My Sunshine" off-key and quiet. By the second verse, the whole ridge was singing. Voices cracked. Someone laughed through tears. The wind carried the sound down into the ravine, where the fire had once roared. I felt Ellen beside me for the first time since the funeral, her hand on my shoulder warm as sunlight. That night, I walked the permanent fire break alone. The moon was full, turning the gravel silver. The new signs gleamed Crestmore Bluffs Community Fire Break, in memory of what we almost lost. I stopped at the exact spot where the breach had been, where Mulch and Pride had built a highway for flames. The scar was still there, pale against the darker soil, but grass was already growing through it. Life stubborn as ever, pushing up through the ashes. I crouched, brushed my fingers across the new green blades, and whispered the only thing that felt true anymore. "We're ready now." Somewhere behind me, a coyote answered long and low across the quiet hills. For the first time in a year, the sound didn't feel like a warning. It felt like forgiveness. 2 years have passed since the Crestmore Ridge blaze, and the ridge itself has changed its mind about us. Spring now brings wildflowers. No one planted fire poppies, the color of fresh blood, lupine tall enough to hide a child's bicycle, and owl's clover so thick along the permanent fire break that the county had to add a second no-picking sign. The 17 concrete slabs where houses once stood have been cleared and turned into a pocket park. There's a simple bronze plaque at the entrance in memory of what we lost, in gratitude for what we learned. Crestmore Bluffs Community Fire Break, protected forever. I walk the line every morning at sunrise. The city still pays me a small stipend as Community Wildfire Mitigation Liaison, which mostly means I get to drink coffee with the fire chief and scare teenagers straight when they think tossing cigarette butts off the overlook is cool. My knees still complain, but they complain less when they have purpose. Eileen moved into a brand new single-story house 2 doors down from mine. Metal roof stucco the color of desert sand, and a defensible space garden so perfect it could be on a CAL FIRE poster. She still bakes cookies every Thursday. The new neighbors fight over who gets to mow her lawn. Scott Langley never missed a Saturday rebuild crew. He can frame a wall now without measuring twice, and he teaches the high school kids how to swing a hammer without smashing their thumbs. He still calls me Chief. I still pretend it bothers me. Karen Thornbridge's name appears exactly once a year on the anniversary, when a short letter arrives from a town in Oregon with no return address. Same handwriting, same heavy stationery. The message is always 2 lines. I still wake up smelling smoke. Thank you for dragging me out. I never write back. Some conversations are finished the moment the fire stops talking. The Fletcher Amendment is now law in 7 western states. HOAs can still vote on paint colors and holiday lights, but the second a property sits inside a red zone on the state fire severity map, defensible space plans are filed with the local fire department, and no board vote can override them. Violations go straight to the district attorney, not a landscaping committee. Last year, the first HOA president in Nevada tried to fight it in court. He lost in 14 minutes. The judge cited Crestmore Bluffs and told him to sit down. I was invited to testify when the bill went national. They flew me to Washington in February, which felt like punishment. I stood in front of a Senate subcommittee in my only suit and told them the same thing I told the Crestmore board the night the clubhouse burned. Fire doesn't read your covenants. It reads fuel slope and wind. Give it a vote, and it will always outvote you. The clip went viral. Someone made it into a ringtone. I still get texts from strangers that just say, "Let's not give fire a vote." Rosa Gill made deputy chief. She sends me photos of new fire breaks being cut in subdivisions that used to look exactly like Crestmore Bluffs did. Perfect lawns, perfect fences, perfect ignorance. The captions are always the same. Your ghost is working overtime, Chief. Some nights, I still dream the ridge is glowing again. I wake up reaching for boots that aren't beside the bed anymore. But the dreams are shorter now, and the house doesn't smell like smoke when I open my eyes. Last week, a 10-year-old girl stopped me on the fire break trail. Freckles, missing front tooth, fearless. "Are you the man who dug the big ditch that saved my house?" she asked. "Part of it," I said. She held out a folded piece of construction paper. Crayon drawing a stick figure firefighter with a gray beard, a red truck, and a yellow line holding back a giant orange monster. Underneath, in purple marker, "Thank you for making the fire stop. You are my hero. Love, Maya." I carry it in my wallet now, next to the singed wedding photo Eileen gave me the morning after the blaze. The oaks we planted on the anniversary are taller than I am. Their roots have already found the water table, knitting the burned soil back together. In another 10 years, they'll throw shade across the trail where kids ride bikes and old men walk dogs, and nobody, absolutely nobody, argues about mulch depth. Sometimes I stop at the highest point of the fire break and look east. The chaparral is still there, still dry, half the year, still waiting. But it waits on the other side of a line that no board, no committee, no ego will ever erase again. The wind still shifts in August, hot and restless, carrying resin and memory. Only now when I smell it coming, I don't reach for my Pulaski. I reach for my phone, send a single text to the group chat that includes every resident in Crestmore Bluffs. "Wind's up, check your zones. We've got this." And every single time the replies come back within minutes. "Copy that, Chief. On it. We're ready." The fire taught us its language. We finally learned how to answer. 5 years to the day. I stand at the eastern overlook, where I once watched the ridge catch fire, the same spot where I keyed the radio and told the world the fire break was gone. The sun is just clearing the new oaks, throwing long shadows across the gravel path that now carries a steady stream of joggers, dog walkers, and kids on scooters. A bronze plaque set into a boulder reads, "Crestmore Bluffs Community Fire Break, dedicated August 12, 2030. Fire gave us 1 vote. We took it back." Daniel Fletcher, Chief Rhett. Below the plaque, someone has left fresh flowers every week for 5 years. I still don't know who. Rosa Gill, now deputy chief for the entire county, pulls up in her white command truck and steps out with 2 paper cups of coffee. She's wearing the same grin she had the day she passed her captain's exam. Thought I'd find you here, she says, handing me a cup. Happy anniversary, old man. Feels more like a birthday, I answer. We stand in silence for a minute, watching the subdivision stretch out below us, new metal roofs, glinting like scales ember-resistant vents, native plants instead of junipers, and the fire break itself, 40 feet wide, maintained by the city, loved by the people who once tried to bury it. 17 families rebuilt. Some left and never came back. The ones who stayed built smarter, stronger, and most surprising of all, kinder. The new HOA is run by a former kindergarten teacher and a structural engineer. Their first act was to change the landscaping budget line item to Wildfire Mitigation Fund. Karen Thornbridge's old award plaques were quietly removed from the rebuilt clubhouse and replaced with framed photos of the volunteer crews who worked weekends for 2 years straight. Eileen passed last winter, peaceful in her sleep at 91. Her house went to Maya, the little girl with the crayon drawing. Maya is 15 now, captain of the high school wildfire awareness team, and she still calls me Grandpa Dan, even though we're not related. She organized today's ceremony. At 10:00 a.m., the crowd gathers 300 neighbors, 4 engine companies, the mayor, and every news station within 200 miles. Maya steps to the microphone in her CAL FIRE Explorer uniform, voice steady. 5 years ago, we learned that pretty can kill you, she begins. One man refused to let it. She turns and looks straight at me. Chief Fletcher didn't just dig a line in the dirt. He dug a line in history. Because of him, no HOA in this state can ever again choose petunias over people. The applause starts slow, then swells until the ridge itself seems to shake with it. Rosa elbows me. Your turn, Chief. I walk to the podium without notes. I've said everything that needed saying in trenches, courtrooms, and nightmares. Today only requires 3 sentences. I lean into the microphone and speak to the cameras, the kids, the future. Fire will always be out there. It's older than us, stronger than us, and it never forgets. But neither do we. As long as we keep this line, this promise between the wild and the ones we love, the story ends differently from now on. I step back. Maya unveils the new addition to the plaque, a second smaller plate bolted beneath the first. In recognition of Daniel Fletcher, who taught a community that courage sometimes starts with a shovel and ends with a neighborhood that never burns the same way twice. The crowd cheers again. Someone starts a wave of hard hat taps, firefighter applause. I feel Ellen's hand on my shoulder, warm and certain, the way it was the day we picked out this stupid, perfect, impossible house. After the ceremony, the kids drag me to the fire break for the annual drill. Sirens whoop, engines roll, and every child in Crestmore Bluffs knows exactly where to go, what to grab, and who to help first. They move like they've done it 100 times because they have. I watch from the overlook as the last engine pulls away, red lights fading down the hill. Rosa joins me again. Think it'll hold, she asks, meaning more than the dirt. I look east. The chaparral is still there, still dry, still ancient and patient. But on this side of the line, 300 families just proved they're more patient still. It'll hold, I say. And for the first time in 31 years of fighting fire, I believe it completely. The wind shifts, warm and resin-sweet, blowing across the oaks and wildflowers across the roofs that learned how to survive across a community that finally speaks the same language as the flames. I lift my coffee to the ridge in a silent toast. Your move, old friend. We're ready.